Zack Baggins became a household name by chasing shadows. From abandoned asylums to cursed objects, he built an empire on fear, turning ghost adventures into one of the most successful paranormal shows ever. To fans, he was fearless, bold, and untouchable. But at 49, the truth behind the man is far darker. Years surrounded by death, demonic energy, and controversy have left him isolated, unhealthy, and haunted by more than just ghosts. His museum stands as both his greatest achievement and his personal prison. This is the tragic lifestyle of Zak Bagans now, a life where the hunter has become the haunted. Zack Bagans' story doesn't start with fame, haunted museums, or a multi-million-dollar paranormal empire. It begins in Las Vegas, where a boy grew up with a fascination most of his peers couldn't understand. While others played sports or dreamed of glamorous futures, Zak was fixated on the shadow. He became obsessed with the idea of what lay beyond life: ghosts, spirits, the unknown. For him, fear wasn't something to avoid. It was something to chase. That obsession, however, also set him apart. As a kid, he wasn't the confident, tattooed TV star viewers would later recognize. He was awkward, shy, and often isolated, caught between fascination and obsession. Zak later admitted that his passion for the paranormal came from a deep place of loneliness. Haunted houses, urban legends, and ghost stories gave him purpose. They were more than entertainment. They were escapes from reality. He devoured horror films, read about hauntings, and spent nights exploring creepy locations with the same intensity others put into sports or schoolwork. It was dangerous, even reckless at times, but it lit a fire inside him that nothing else could. By his teenage years, this fixation began shaping his identity. He wasn't content with simply hearing stories. He wanted to see, to feel, to prove that the supernatural was real. That need to prove himself against the unknown hinted at something deeper. A boy desperate for control in a world that often felt chaotic and out of reach. Instead of building a normal social life, Zak was building his relationship with the darkness, chasing adrenaline through fear. These haunted beginnings would become the foundation for everything that followed. Unlike other TV personalities who stumbled into fame, Zak Bagans was preparing for his role long before cameras ever rolled. But even at this early stage, the seeds of tragedy were being planted. Obsession rarely comes without cost, and Zak's fixation with death and spirits would one day make him famous, while also threatening to consume him entirely. By the early 2000s, Zak Bagans wasn't just fascinated by ghosts, he was determined to prove they existed. That determination gave birth to what would eventually become his empire: Ghost Adventures. It started small, with Zak and his friends, Aaron Goodwin and Nick Groff, filming an independent documentary in 2004. They weren't backed by big studios or networks. They were just three men with cameras, courage, and an obsession. They explored haunted sites with raw intensity, locking themselves inside places most people wouldn't step foot in after dark. The original Ghost Adventures documentary was gritty, chaotic, and authentic. Zak wasn't polished. He was confrontational, loud, and unafraid to yell into the void. When the documentary aired, it caught the attention of fans and eventually the Travel Channel. Almost overnight, Zak went from being an unknown thrill seeker to the face of paranormal television. Viewers were hooked. Unlike the calm, investigative shows of the past, Ghost Adventures felt like a street fight with the supernatural, and Zak was leading the charge. But with success came pressure. Suddenly, Zak wasn't just chasing ghosts for passion. He was performing for millions. He had to live up to the fearless persona he'd created, one that stared down demons and dared spirits to show themselves. The lines between Zak the man and Zak the character blurred. To fans, he became larger than life, a symbol of defiance against the unknown. To himself, it was harder to separate reality from performance. The show's success launched him into fame, but it also locked him into an identity he could never escape. He couldn't be ordinary, couldn't step away, couldn't admit fear without shattering the empire he was building. And as the seasons piled on, so did the weight of expectation. Ghost Adventures made Zack Baggins a star, but it also made him a prisoner to the very persona that brought him fame. As Ghost Adventures grew from a scrappy documentary into one of the most recognizable paranormal series on television, Zack Baggins began shaping himself into more than just a TV host. He became a brand. Season after season, the show expanded its scope, visiting asylums, prisons, battlefields, and abandoned towns, always with Zack at the center, daring spirits to reveal themselves. His confrontational style, provoking ghosts instead of quietly observing, gave the show its edge, but it also cemented the persona he would never escape: the fearless ghost hunter, a man who seemed to thrive in darkness. With the show's popularity came opportunities. Zack released books, documentaries, and specials, all feeding into the growing image of him as a paranormal rock star. But his most ambitious project was the Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. To fans, it was a dream, a sprawling collection of cursed and infamous artifacts where visitors could walk among items tied to tragedy and death. To Zack, it was more than a museum. It was the physical embodiment of everything he had built, his empire carved out of fear and fascination. The museum, however, became more than just a business. It became his life, surrounded daily by objects tied to murderers, disasters, and alleged demonic forces. Zack immersed himself fully in a world of darkness. Even skeptics admitted that the energy inside the museum was heavy, unsettling, and strange. For those who believed, it was obvious. Zack was exposing himself to forces that no man could endure forever. Financially, he had reached the pinnacle. Ghost Adventures was a ratings powerhouse. The museum drew thousands of visitors, and his name was synonymous with modern ghost hunting. But personally, the cracks were forming. The more Zack built his empire, the more he isolated himself within it. He wasn't just documenting haunted history anymore, he was living in it, surrounding himself with the very tragedies he had once claimed to investigate. Success made him rich, but it also tied him to a lifestyle where death was his business, his identity, and his prison. On screen, Zack Baggins was everything fans wanted him to be: bold, dramatic, unshakable. He charged into haunted basements, stared into dark hallways, and yelled at unseen entities as if he had no fear. But behind the persona was a different story. The man and the character had fused, and Zack found himself living as the ghost hunter even when the cameras stopped rolling. The act of being Zack Baggins had become his reality. Former colleagues and insiders began to whisper about his need for control. He was meticulous, sometimes overly demanding, wanting every detail of Ghost Adventures to match his vision. Cast members like Nick Groff eventually left, fueling rumors of behind-the-scenes clashes and disagreements about direction. For fans, the split raised questions. Was Zack's drive for perfection a strength, or was it a symptom of something darker? An inability to share the spotlight, or perhaps a growing paranoia that only he could protect the empire he'd built? The public image of Zack as a fearless investigator often masked what those close to him described as isolation. Unlike many TV stars who thrived on the red carpet, Zack rarely appeared outside of his paranormal world. He didn't chase Hollywood fame, didn't settle down with a family, didn't build a life outside of ghosts. His relationships, both professional and personal, often fractured under the weight of his intensity. For fans, the difference between persona and man became harder to see. They adored the television Zack, the guy who dared to provoke spirits and claimed to bring evidence of the afterlife into their living rooms. But what they didn't see was the toll it took. Living inside that identity meant Zack could never turn it off. Every day, every conversation, every choice was filtered through the lens of being the Ghost Adventures host. The tragedy was that the persona brought him everything: money, fame, influence, but it also robbed him of the chance to simply be himself. The line between reality and performance blurred so much that even Zack may have forgotten where one ended and the other began. And at 49, that blurring has left him trapped, not just by haunted places, but by the haunted character he created. When Zack Baggins opened his haunted museum in Las Vegas in 2017, it felt like the natural evolution of everything he had built. Fans lined up outside, eager to see cursed haunted objects, haunted dolls, and infamous relics of murderers and tragedies. The museum was marketed as the most haunted collection in the world, and Zak presented it as both a shrine to the paranormal and a daring act of bravery. For him, it was more than a business. It was a temple of fear, a place where his obsession could finally take physical form. Inside the museum, visitors are led through dark corridors, into rooms filled with items tied to death and despair. There's the Dybbuk box, said to be the most haunted object in existence, a wine cabinet that carries a legend of curses so strong it inspired Hollywood films. There are artifacts belonging to serial killers, pieces of furniture from infamous murders, and dolls whispered to carry evil spirits. Each item has a story, and each story is tied to suffering. For the casual visitor, it's a thrill. For Zak, it's his daily reality. He has admitted that certain artifacts made him physically ill, describing episodes of blurred vision, overwhelming dread, and unexplained health problems after handling them. Guests have fainted, cried, or claimed they felt touched by unseen hands while walking through the museum. Some fans view these events as proof of the museum's authenticity, but others quietly wonder, what is all this exposure doing to Zak himself? Surrounded constantly by stories of tragedy and the energies of artifacts many believe are cursed, Zak lives in an environment few could endure. While fans leave after an hour-long tour, he remains, immersed in an atmosphere of death. Even skeptics acknowledge that constantly focusing on negativity, trauma, and darkness can warp a person's spirit. For Zak, who has spent decades willingly seeking it, the museum is not just a collection of objects, it is a mirror of his own life. The Haunted Museum is his crown jewel, his proof of legacy, but it's also a cage. Each artifact may be haunted by its own story, but together they symbolize Zak's deepest tragedy. He has surrounded himself with death to such an extent that he has become a ghost himself, extent that it has become his closest companion. The museum is his empire, but it may also be what is slowly breaking him. As Zack Baggins pushed further into his haunted empire, whispers about his health grew louder. He has spoken about chronic pain, back problems, and vision issues, sometimes attributing them to the cursed artifacts he keeps around him. Whether or not spirits are to blame, the truth is undeniable. Zak's body shows the wear of decades spent chasing adrenaline and surrounding himself with stress. He's no longer the young investigator who stormed into abandoned prisons with reckless energy. At 49, he moves slower, guarded by a fragility he rarely acknowledges on camera. Fans have noticed changes. His once commanding voice sometimes sounds strained. His public appearances have become more selective, often limited to promotional events tied to his show or museum. Unlike other celebrities who branch out into lighter ventures, Zak remains tethered to the dark, and that tether seems to weigh heavier as the years go on. He often speaks of being drained, and insiders describe him as increasingly private, even reclusive. Isolation has become one of the most telling aspects of his lifestyle. Unlike many public figures, Zak has never built a traditional family life. He hasn't married, and long-term relationships remain largely absent from his story. Instead, his companions are his artifacts, his museum, and the crew members who orbit his projects. Friends and colleagues have come and gone, some leaving under mysterious or tense circumstances. Each departure fueled speculation that Zak's need for control, combined with his intense lifestyle, made close bonds difficult to maintain. The cost of fame has always been steep, but for Zak, the cost is compounded by the environment he has chosen. Constant exposure to trauma stories, cursed legends, and haunted environments has taken an invisible toll. Even skeptics who don't believe in ghosts acknowledge that anyone living in such conditions, surrounded by constant negativity, would inevitably feel its effects. And Zak has lived in that space for decades. At 49, his health struggles and isolation paint the picture of a man who sacrificed everything for the empire he built. He achieved his dream, yes, but the dream came with a price. The fearless ghost hunter who once ran headfirst into darkness now appears haunted by the very shadows he chased. His body aches, his circle shrinks, and his world feels smaller, confined within the walls of his museum. Zack Bagans built an identity around surviving the haunted, but the tragedy is that survival has come at the cost of living. Behind the television persona and the walls of his haunted museum lies another element of Zack Bagans' tragic lifestyle, his personal life, or rather, the absence of one. Unlike many celebrities who eventually step back to start families or build personal lives outside of their careers, Zack has remained elusive and alone. He has never married, never had children, and his long-term relationships are almost mythical in how rarely they surface. Fans occasionally speculate about his dating life, with rumors attaching him to actresses or paranormal enthusiasts, but nothing concrete ever lasts. For a man whose face has been on television for nearly 2 decades, his off-screen life is almost a void. Some see this as intentional, Zack keeping himself mysterious, living as the enigmatic ghost hunter even when the cameras are off. But others see it as isolation, the result of a man so consumed by his work and identity that he left little room for real intimacy. His colleagues, too, have not always stayed by his side. Nick Groff's departure from Ghost Adventures created a rift that fans still debate today. Was it creative differences, power struggles, or simply Zack's controlling nature? Insiders hint at clashes, egos, and the difficulty of working in a constant high-stress environment with someone who demanded perfection. Controversy has followed Zack in other ways as well. He's faced criticism for how he sensationalizes tragedies, using haunted objects tied to real deaths or violent crimes as attractions. Some accuse him of exploiting grief, turning pain into entertainment. For Zack, these accusations may sting, but they're part of the tightrope he's always walked, feeding fans' hunger for fear while trying to balance respect for the dead. It's a balance that few believe he's ever truly mastered. Yet perhaps the most haunting controversy is not about his work, but about his life. Rumors of paranoia swirl among fans who notice his increasingly guarded demeanor. Former collaborators suggest that Zack has grown more distrustful over time, cutting ties quickly and rarely letting people close. What began as a pursuit of ghosts has left him living like one, detached, drifting, and often misunderstood. The rebel ghost hunter who once shouted defiantly into the darkness now seems surrounded by it, not as a performer, but as a man. Zack Baggins has spent the majority of his adult life immersing himself in death, not metaphorically, but literally. Abandoned asylums filled with the echoes of suffering, prisons where executions once took place, battlefields where thousands bled, and museums filled with cursed relics of violence. These are not occasional visits, they are his entire reality. He has built a career, a business, and an identity around surrounding himself with death. And after decades, the toll is undeniable. The Haunted Museum stands as the most visible example of this. Every hallway is lined with artifacts tied to tragedy. The Dybbuk box, once rumored to curse its owners. Paintings like The Anguished Man, said to bring nightmares to those who stare too long. Chairs from hospitals where patients died in agony. Personal items from notorious killers. Visitors pass through, shiver, and leave. Zack stays. Day after day, he walks among objects that people believe carry the weight of spirits, curses, and trauma. Even if one doesn't believe in the supernatural, psychologists argue that constant exposure to negativity can wear down the human spirit. Zack's life is an experiment in what happens when a person never steps away from that negativity. Unlike others who research or document tragedies but then return to normalcy, Zack never truly leaves. His home is filled with artifacts, his work is centered on death, and his image is inseparable from it. This lifestyle has shaped him into a paradox. He is both the master of fear and its prisoner. He profits from death, yet it surrounds him so completely that it leaves no room for life. Former fans who once admired his daring have begun to express concern, noting how his tone has shifted over the years. The playful bravado of early Ghost Adventures has given way to something darker, heavier, almost mournful. It's as though the years of immersing himself in death have etched themselves into his voice, his posture, his very being. At 49, Zack Baggins is a man who lives not among the living, but among the remnants of the dead. His empire thrives on tragedy, but but that empire may have cost him everything else. To his fans, he remains a legend of paranormal television. To those who look closer, he appears like one of the very spirits he chases, a man trapped between worlds, unable to fully step into either. At 49, Zack Baggins lives in a world he built but cannot escape. To millions, he is still the fearless ghost hunter, the face of ghost adventures, and the curator of one of the most infamous haunted collections on Earth. But behind that image lies a life defined by isolation, failing health, and an empire that feels more like a prison than an achievement. He has no family of his own, few enduring friendships, and spends his days surrounded by artifacts tied to violence and tragedy. The persona that made him rich has also left him trapped, unable to step away from the darkness. Zack dreamed of proving that ghosts exist, but the cruel irony is that his own life has become ghost-like, lonely, haunted, and fading into the very shadows he chased. His story isn't about conquering fear, but about what happens when fear becomes all you know.